So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Naveed Arif Iqbal closing keynote. My name is Chris Frank. I serve as the medical director at University Health and Counseling here at the University of Michigan. Really hope you enjoy the conference so far. I know I found it really engaging and productive, and I hope everyone else did too. We're not done yet. Shortly, we're going to be hearing from two experts in mental health and resilience, who will be discussing how cultivating relatively small shifts in our mindsets can have big impacts on our behaviors and overall well-being. But first, I'd like to introduce Arif Iqbal, who generously sponsors this keynote named after his son, Naveed. While Arif can't be here in person today, he's shared a video message, which we'll be playing in a moment. And on behalf of everyone who's been affected by consequences and stigma around mental health issues, I'd like to say thank you to Arif for his endowment of this keynote lecture. Your support not only impacts those of us in attendance today, but also those who will encounter later after the event, after this conference, and hopefully well into the future when we use the insights we've gained here to help someone in need. And with that, I'll turn it over to Arif.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, faculty, students, and dedicated advocates for mental health. It's truly an honor and deeply personal privilege to introduce the Naveed Arif Iqbal keynote lecture at this year's Mental Health on College Campuses conference. This lecture honors my beloved son Naveed, whose kindness, compassion, and quiet strength continue to inspire our collective mission today. As we gather here, united by our shared commitment to understanding and improving mental health, I invite you to reflect on an emotion deeply intertwined with the human experience, particularly in the current environment and on college campuses today: despair. Despair can feel overwhelming, isolating, even paralyzing. It can silence voices, close doors, and convince us we are alone. Yet despair, challenging as it may be, also carries within it an extraordinary potential. It invites empathy, sparks compassion, and can become a powerful catalyst for profound personal and collective growth. The poet John Keats understood this truth intimately. In his poignant Ode on Melancholy, Keats reminds us that our deepest sorrows and greatest joys are intricately bound together. Our capacity for despair is paradoxically evidence of our immense capacity for beauty, compassion, and understanding. In other words, experiencing sadness deeply means we also have the capacity for profound empathy, connection, and love. Anybody who knew Naveed knows that these qualities were abundant in him, evident in how he consistently showed up for others. So the crucial question before us today is this: how do we transform despair into hope? How do we reshape our inner dialogues and quiet struggles into opportunities for care, meaning, and meaningful action? Megan O'Rourke beautifully articulated a powerful truth in her memoir of loss. The people we most love do become a physical part of us. When I lost Naveed, my world felt shattered. The despair was overwhelming. Yet over time, that very despair became my catalyst to speak louder, act more decisively, and fiercely advocate for a culture of compassion and meaningful mental health support. Naveed's memory is now my guiding star, a constant reminder of the urgency to embrace emotional honesty, nurture meaningful connections, and act compassionately and decisively to support those around us. His memory calls each of us to action to transform the pain of loss and isolation into a determined movement toward greater understanding, community, and empathy. And this is precisely why gatherings like ours today are so vital. Conferences like this offer critical spaces to acknowledge our struggles, openly discuss our emotional realities, and empower us with the tools to transform despair into lasting change. Today's keynote conversation is about exactly this. How do we bridge the gap between despair and hope? How can our campuses become communities where no student feels they must navigate emotional turmoil alone? The questions we collectively ask today can shape the compassionate actions we take tomorrow. And today, we have the distinct privilege of learning from Dr. Ethan Kross, Professor of Psychology and of Management and Organizations, and Faculty Associate at the Center for Positive Organizations, whose groundbreaking research into emotional regulation directly addresses these themes. Dr. Kross's innovative work equips us with strategies to navigate powerful emotions like despair, offering practical ways to reshape our internal narratives and positively channel our emotional energy. Let today's discussion with Dr. Kross and Angie Farrehi, Director of the Michigan Engineering Care Center, inspire not just reflection, but action. Let us leave here committed not only to understanding despair, but actively addressing it, transforming compassion into concrete support, and pledging ourselves anew to the life-changing work of mental health advocacy on our campuses. Though I lost Naveed, I gained clarity of purpose, transforming my grief into action, my loss into advocacy. In honoring Naveed's memory today, let each of us commit to listening more deeply, caring more openly, and acting more courageously. Together, we can ensure despair is met not with silence, but with compassion, hope, and powerful collective action. Thank you for being here, for honoring Naveed's memory, and for dedicating yourselves to this vital life-saving cause. With heartfelt gratitude, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Ethan Kross and Angie Farrehi for an engaging and transformative conversation. Thank you.
Dr. Kross, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real honor, and I don't know that I deserve that introduction, but I'll take it. So and thanks everyone for coming on this beautiful, beautiful Ann Arbor day.
Yes.
I didn't realize the rain could move horizontally as I walked from my office to the building, but it can.
Well, we're just grateful we don't have a tornado right now.
So that's a great example of putting things in perspective, which we're going to talk about. So well done.
Well, why don't we first start with something that Arkeef mentioned. So Arkeef mentioned that, he talked about the transformative potential of pain and isolation. And in Shift, you explore how mindset changes can really help individuals in navigating emotional turmoil. So Ethan, how would you say that students, especially those that might be experiencing challenges, whether it's loss or isolation or other challenges, how can they utilize mindset shifts to turn these challenges into opportunities?
So it's a great question. I want to come back to the isolation point at the end because we actually just published a really cool paper on exactly that issue. But in general, step one is actually believing that you can change the way you think about your circumstances to change the way you feel. I actually tell a story in my book. Maybe 10 years ago, I was just reading like the updates on new articles that were coming out, and I came across this article that reported that 40% of adolescents did not believe that they could control their emotions. That statistic really stopped me in my tracks because if you don't think you can do something, then why would you take any efforts to actually do it? If I don't think there's anything I can do to get in shape, why am I going to pay for a gym membership and do the painful, act of exercising each day? It's not logical. And so step number one is genuinely believing that there are options that you have if you're suffering from despair, whether it be as a function of loss or isolation. And once you have that motivation, then what you need to do is be aware of the tools that exist for how to reframe your circumstances. And there are lots of ways that you can reframe things, right? You can reframe things in ways that actually make you feel worse. So we often talk about mindset as a universal good. It's not. There are depressogenic mindsets and anxiolytic mindsets where that is perpetuating the problem. So you want to adopt the specific kind of mindset that can put you on the right trajectory. And there are a couple of helpful, tips for doing that. One of my favorite ones is when you are suffering, what advice would you give to a close friend or loved one? We are often really great advisors to other people, but when we ourselves are suffering, we give ourselves terrible, terrible advice. We say things to, well, let me ask the folks sitting here. How many of you here say things to yourself that you would never dare say to another human being? Show of hands. Okay, they're all
Practically
going up. They're all
everyone.
going up. This is a universal. Sometimes people don't even feel comfortable articulating out loud what they think to themselves because they're actually ashamed of it. It's so embarrassing. So this is one, and I will say I utilize this myself. When I'm struggling with something, what would I say to my buddy, my daughter, my wife? And I'll use a tool called linguistic distancing to help me give myself the advice that I would someone else. And what linguistic distancing involves doing is trying to coach yourself through a problem using your own name and you. So I might think to myself, all right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation right now? Now, importantly, you don't want to do this out loud. You want to do this silently in your head. But the way it works is most of the time that we use the word you, 99% of the time, it's when we're thinking about and referring to other people. Same is true of names. So when you use the word you or your name to address yourself, it's flipping a switch in your brain that's putting you into this advice-giving mode, to, giving advice to others. And we're really good at doing that. So that's one suggestion. Like, actually believe that you can change the way you think about your circumstances, and then use tools like distant self-talk. There are countless others to help you change the way you're thinking about the circumstance.
Ethan, that's such great advice. And I wonder, you started by saying that about 40% of students don't believe that they can make these changes. What other options do you suggest for them in terms of building that belief in themselves or that motivation?
Well, so I kind of racked my brain around that statistic. Like 40% of people is a lot of people. So are they all just totally wrong? Like this was an existential moment for me in my life, by the way, when I read this statistic, because I'm the director of a lab here at Michigan called the Emotion and Self-Control Lab. I've dedicated my professional life to understanding how people can control their emotions, and now 40% of people are saying it's not possible. Like, maybe I made the wrong career choice, is what I'm thinking. So here's how I make sense of this statistic. There are facets of our emotional lives that are out of our control. So you're walking down the street and you pass by someone who doesn't smell very nice. Do you experience an emotional reaction? No one has ever had this experience of bumping into someone smelly, huh? Okay, now I'm seeing the heads nod. So you brush up against someone who smells good or bad, you're going to have an emotional reaction. I'm guessing that virtually everyone in this room sometimes experiences a dark thought that pops into their head. It's a thought that you wouldn't want to tell someone else about, and it elicits an emotional reaction. You don't know where it comes from, it just kind of activates. It's called an intrusive thought. It's a universal phenomenon. We don't have control always over the emotions that are automatically triggered as we live our lives. So we don't have control over that. But once those emotions are triggered, once they're activated, what we have enormous control over is their trajectory. Whether we push them up or down, whether we prolong the response or are capable of shortening it. And that's really where many of the tools that we've spent years studying in my lab that I write about in Shift have their effects in that trajectory of the response. So it's true, there are some parts we don't have control over, but a whole lot that we do. And I think appreciating that distinction is step one for embracing the idea that change is possible.
I think that a lot of people will be able to resonate with what you've said. You also mentioned the isolation.
Oh, yes.
case.
So thank you. I forgot about it already. So thank you for reminding me. So how many people here remember like the Surgeon General's warning about the toxicity of being alone and loneliness? Yeah, okay, the hands are going up. I'm very interactive here, so I want to see the hands. Thank you. Recently, we tried to interrogate this idea, because what's interesting about this experience of aloneness and loneliness is we tend to conflate those two experiences, when in fact, you can be alone and not feel lonely at all. Or you could feel lonely in a crowded room, if you're familiar with that quote. So the correlation between loneliness and being alone is a lot weaker than you think. Now, what's interesting about all of the discourse surrounding loneliness and isolation is, if you look at the media, and we have in this recent paper, we looked at the last several years of media coverage on being alone, and we wanted to see, how is being alone described in the media? Overwhelmingly, it's described negatively. This is bad for you, it's toxic. That's really interesting, because our beliefs are shaped by the news to which we are exposed. So we've got public health warnings telling us that being alone is really bad for us. We've got New York Times and Atlantic and other periodical articles continually talking about being alone in negative terms. Then we do an experiment where we create 2 articles. And in one article, we say being alone is really bad for you. In the other article, we say being alone is really good for you. And then we measure people's beliefs about being alone. Is it good or bad for you? What do you think happened?
The power of influence, right?
If you read an article that says this is good for you, you believe it is good for you. If you read an article that says it's bad for you, you believe it's bad for you. Here's why that matters. What we then do is we track people over the course of several weeks, and we text message them several times a day over the course of that 2-week period. And each time we text them, we ask them, are you alone? Right? How much time have you spent on your own since the last time we texted you? And we measure how they feel. What we find, if you think being alone is bad for you, the more time you spend alone, the more lonely you become. But if you think being alone is good for you, it's an opportunity to rest and restore and be creative, you actually feel better the more time you spend alone. So what I love about that research, and we show that this is generalizes cross-culturally, is that it really highlights the power of our beliefs to shape our emotional experiences, even around an issue like loneliness and being alone. And so I think this finding is directly relevant to college students, because they're continually hearing that being alone is bad for them, and not necessarily.
You know, it's a fascinating topic that you bring up, and it relates in part to social media too, and digital ecosystems, if you will. You touch on this topic in the book Shift. I'm curious, are there specific tools that you might recommend or approaches that you would recommend to students to mitigate the harmful effects of social media on students' mental well-being?
Yeah, so there are two core techniques I would suggest. Number one, curate your feeds to the extent possible. There are ways of curating the kinds of information that you're exposed to. Being deliberate about that, I think, is really useful. So, like, say you don't want to see things like this that are pushing you in a negative direction, and if there are other kinds of pictures or posts that push you in another direction positively, you want to endorse those. I've actively done that in my life, and I get like Instagram videos of monkeys doing funky things, and other kinds of silly videos actually make me feel better when I see them. So having some agency over how you interact with the different platforms, I think, is really important. The other thing to do is to remind yourself that there are ways of reframing information you are exposed to that might lead you to feel distress. So perhaps the greatest liability that emerges for folks when they're on Instagram and other kinds of apps like that are they're scrolling, life is good, and then you see your nemesis who is outperforming you in some way, and you inevitably feel bad about yourself. So you engage in a social comparison that elicits feelings of envy, and those feelings can sometimes stick around for a while. The hack for dealing with that is to reframe that comparison. So instead of thinking, oh my God, this person is doing all these things that I'm not doing, their life looks so much better, you reframe, you think, wow, they were able to do this, so can I. Right? So actually convert the comparison into a source of motivation that you can try to achieve, the same kinds of outcomes or experiences that they've had. That's a way of neutralizing the negative impact of that social comparison. You can also do this in the other direction. If you come across information about someone who's doing way worse than you, and you may reflexively think, oh my God, it happened to them, it could happen to me, which is an automatic response that many people have. Flip it, right? Wow, I'm so grateful that this hasn't happened to me, right? So these are simple shifts that you can engage in to neutralize those negative comparisons.
And we really appreciate hearing that, Dr. Kross, because it's so relevant to our college student populations, especially here where there is so much competitiveness, where you think that everyone around you may be, performing better than you and that you are doing worse. So these hacks, if you will, that you've provided, I think are really beneficial for our student populations as well.
Yeah, well, faculty too. We're not immune to the comparisons either. That's
a very, very good point. So it relates also to self-talk and dialogue, which you've spoken a bit about today. You highlight the importance of self-talk in Shift. What are some practical tools that you would give to students, for example, to use this positive or distant self-talk that you mentioned in moments when one is experiencing academic stress, or to boost their confidence or performance, let's say, before an exam or before a dissertation?
Well, so distant self-talk is one useful tool. Another is a set of tools that I call mental time travel, which are also really easy to use and can be effective. And there are two ways that you can engage in mental time travel. So you could go into the future to ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this issue a week from now, a year from now, 10 years from now? What that does is it highlights the impermanence of what you're going through. When we really start getting activated and anxious or angry or sad, whatever the emotion is, we tend to zoom in on the awfulness of that experience. So if it's before a test or a presentation, we think, oh my God, how am I going to do this? When we do that, we lose sight of the fact that the vast majority of our emotional experiences, they get triggered, and then as time goes on, they fade in their intensity. You all know this to be true because you've experienced it throughout your lives, but we lose sight of that in the moment. So asking yourself, how am I going to feel about this 10 years from now? Well, I'm probably not going to worry about it too much at that point, right? Like, it's just a test. I'll be on, my way with a career and family and so forth. So that's mental time travel into the future. You can also mental time travel into the past. This works a little bit differently. So I open my book Shift with the story of my grandmother and grandfather who lived in Eastern Poland during World War II. And they experienced these just devastating events where they witnessed in a very brief period of time their families and friends slaughtered in front of them, proceeded to be homeless for years in the frozen Polish woods, eventually made it over here, built a great life. When I'm really struggling with something, I'm really anxious or stressed out, I will jump into my mental time travel machine. I will take that machine back to 1943. I will get out and I will spend some time with my grandparents when they're fleeing from the Nazis. I don't have to spend a lot of time with them for that experience to powerfully put in perspective what I'm going through and how it often pales in comparison. Well, not often, always pales in comparison to what they endured. And we all have experiences like that we can draw from our personal lives, from the lives of our cultures and communities, that we could really anchor on to help broaden our perspective when we find the negative self-talk taking over.
What I really love about that is that it really provides a very colorful experience to perspective building, both in the past and present. And these are techniques that I think everyone can benefit from, particularly in the work that we do with students, because we do see students oftentimes very overwhelmed, and it becomes a very significant event. One particular incident of an exam failure or talk that they've given becomes really the primary focal point of their attention. And so in terms of managing some of the stress and enhancing the growth that you talk about in Shift, how would you recommend a starting point for individuals that are just so overwhelmed, juggling the various parts of life, academics, etc.?
Well, step one is learning about the tools that are out there. Let's see, what have we talked about? Mental time travel, 2 tools. We talked about distant self-talk. We talked about some other reframes.
Yes.
Decades of research has gone into the identifications of those tools and the profiling of how they work. But what I love about them is it took us 7 minutes to share them with you. And now these are things that you can do. I think we have a responsibility as educators, as elders, if you will, in our society, to share these kinds of science-based tools with our community. And that's the first step, right? Like I often draw a comparison to managing our emotions to becoming physically fit. So think about mental fitness or emotional fitness and physical fitness. If you want to get in shape, what's the first thing you need to do? You need to learn about what the different exercises are to get you to that goal. So you got to learn how to do a push-up. You have to learn how to do a pull-up. You have to learn how to do a squat. Whatever the exercises are, I'm projecting here, right? These aren't complicated things to do, but you just need to know what they are. And that, I think, is step one, learning about these different tools. There are dozens of them. Once you learn about the tools, then you got to start self-experimenting to figure out what are the unique combinations that work well for you, given your unique life experiences. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions when it comes to managing our emotional lives. Different tools work for different people in different situations. Embracing that mentality and having tools to bring to bear, I think that's the real secret to solving this puzzle of emotion dysregulation.
I'm really grateful that you mentioned the role that we all play, in particular, in helping raise awareness on these tools for students and those that we work with. How do you see universities, through the collective efforts of faculty, administrators, peers, and the broader community, create these environments where both inside and outside of the classroom, we can actively support students in making these mindset shifts?
Well, I think there are great examples of this happening here at Michigan in terms of what the values of the institution are when it comes to emotional health and resilience. You increasingly over the past several years see leaders at this university, including some folks in this audience, who talk about the importance of mental health, of resilience. So what they're doing, leaders, when they're having those kinds of conversations with folks and making those kinds of announcements, is they're communicating the values and beliefs of this organization, of this institution to which we all belong. Those values and beliefs, they're really important, right? Like, these things matter. But then what organizations also need to do is they need to back up those beliefs with practices that they share and offer to their constituents, which we also see happening here, right? Like this talk is an example of an attempt to provide people with tools. That is a concerted effort that we see happening, and I think has to continue happening here and at any organization that really cares about these kinds of issues. Now, there's also a role for our peers to play in this process too. So, one of the really sad findings in the territory of emotion regulation is that we often think that talking to other people is going to help us manage our emotions more effectively. But if you look at how people often feel after they talk to one of their friends about their problems, they don't always feel better. Sometimes they feel worse. Has anyone here ever had a conversation with a buddy and you wanted to talk to them to get it out, but you leave the conversation and you actually don't feel any better, you just feel worse? I can't believe you just threw everyone under the bus. You all put your hands up.
No, I see some hands up.
I'm joking. You all did it. But this is a very common phenomenon, right? You find someone to talk to, You let it out, you vent your emotions, you express them. You leave the conversation feeling like your buddy has your back. They're there for you, but the problem is still there. There is an art to being a good emotional advisor to someone else, and it is something that is easily teachable. Right? There are 2 core steps. You want to empathize and connect with the person you're talking to if you're coming to me to talk to me about a problem. And then I also want to help you broaden your perspective. So connect, but also advise. We don't teach people that, right? That is a skill that we can teach to everyone so that everyone is in a better position to support one another.
I really love this idea of being an emotional advisor that you mentioned. How do you utilize this emotional advising even in the classroom environment?
Well, I follow those, 2 ways. I teach my students about this. We have classes on precisely this topic where I introduce, here's how emotional support can go wrong, and here's how it goes right. Here are the steps. We practice it with one another. And then when students come to me for support, I have a scientific blueprint for how to steer those conversations. It's got 2 steps. I just told them to you. I listen, learn, empathize, and then I work with the student or colleague or friend to help them work through the situation. It's that simple. And inevitably, I think it results in better, more productive conversations. The one negative that you need to be aware of if you start doing this in conversations that you have with friends and colleagues is you're going to start to get more calls from people because the conversations end up being really productive.
Which can be a good thing.
Yeah.
And then that leads to boundary setting, right?
That's true.
Dr. Kross, you also talked about these external pressures, such as societal expectations, family expectations, etc. in shift, and how they can significantly impact one's ability to really shift their mindsets and pursue personal growth. How can the tools that in Mind Shifts and Shift help students to manage the stress that comes externally?
Well, what I love about all the tools that I talk about here are they are what I call domain generalizable tools. What does that mean? These are tools that you can use to manage emotions no matter where they are triggered from. So we typically experience emotions when we encounter events that are meaningful to us, whether those are events that actually happen in the world, we read about them in a paper, or that we imagine in our minds. But the tools that are in there, they work on the emotions. So it really doesn't matter necessarily what the source of the trigger is. You've got tools that you could bring to bear. It's kind of like showing up to a work site as a carpenter. So my grandfather's a carpenter. He had like this wonderful toolbox. And it didn't matter what kind of issue he faced, right? If he had to build a house from scratch or fix something, like he had tools. He knew how they worked. He knew which one or which combinations of tools that he needed to get the job done. The same is true for these tools that I talk about here. Sometimes the anxiety emerges from our own doing. We catastrophize. We think of worst case scenarios. We're really good at doing this, right? Anyone else here really good at doing this? Just me? Okay, thank you. Right? Like we can hypothesize out the wazoo, and the next thing you know, it's going in the wrong direction. Sometimes things happening around us can be a source of anxiety, though, right? Like society right now is very turbulent. We don't have control. You can always reframe how you're thinking about things. You always have control of your attention, how to deploy it. You can always make choices to leverage your senses in particular ways to elicit certain kinds of desired emotional responses. This is why knowledge of these tools, I think, is so incredibly important.
I love that. It's your emotional toolbox that you build, and you also shift then your perspectives, as you mentioned, so to focus on the things that you do have control over.
That's right. That's right. We did a couple of large-scale studies during COVID where we wanted to see what tools are most effective for helping people deal with their anxiety. And so every day for a couple of weeks, we asked people to rate their anxiety and indicate which of 18 different tools they used to manage that emotional experience. What we found, number one, almost no one used one tool to manage their anxiety. On average, it was between 3 and 4 tools were used on any given day. But what we also found was there was enormous variability in the tools that people used. The 3 or 4 things that you did were very different from the 3 or 4 things that I did. Sometimes the 3 or 4 things that benefited me on one day were different from the 4 or 5 tools that benefited me on another day. So it really is about finding the unique combinations of tools that work best for you, given the unique circumstances you're in.
It also sounds like, you can have these tools, but practicing using these tools is also critically important.
Super important. So I actually end the book by talking about this framework called WHOOP. You get the song reference?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else get the song reference? Okay. You're supposed to cue the music when I say that, guys in the back. WHOOP is an acronym. It stands for the following. Well, let me back up a second before I tell you what WHOOP stands for. So there's this real problem when it comes to taking knowledge you're exposed to and implementing it in daily life. People attend talks like this. They read books. They learn nuggets. They say, yes, I'm going to do this the next time I find myself distressed. And inevitably, they do not. They get flustered, and then they kind of spiral. This is often referred to as the New Year's resolution dilemma. Like, we make a resolution to act differently, we do it for a day or two, and then we fall off the wagon. So lots of scientists have tried to understand, why are we so god-awful at taking our knowledge and converting it into actions? And they've figured out why we stink. And they've come up with a framework to help us. Ergo, WHOOP. So what does WHOOP stand for? The W in WHOOP, that's your wish. So what is the goal that you have? Let's be really concrete about what this goal is. I want to be more regulated when my kids don't listen to me. Okay, I'm now clear about what my goal is. Now you get to the first O, outcome. What is the outcome that will come about if you achieve this wish? Well, I'll have a better relationship with my kids. I'll be a better dad. I'll be happier. The point of thinking about the outcome next is to really energize people around the goal that they're hoping to pursue. We want to really motivate you to go after this goal.
It sounds very much like what you started the conversation with, is that motivation, the 40%.
There you go. So now we are like leaning hard into the motivation. So we've got the goal, we've got the motivation. Now we get to the second O, that's our obstacles. What are the personal obstacles that might stand in the way of you achieving this goal? Well, I really get upset when my kids, don't listen to me and they fight with one another. And I feel I get hot in my face and I feel like I can't think straight. I'm exaggerating, by the way, but you get the point. Right? So the point here is, now we are identifying the specific circumstance where we often struggle. We're bookmarking it in our mind. We know what to look out for. Then we get to the P, which is our plan. But it's not any kind of plan. It's called an if-then plan. If my kids don't listen to me and I start getting hot in the face, then, and you plug in your strategies, then I'm going to take a step back and give myself advice like I would someone else. And I'm going to jump into the mental time travel machine and visit my grandparents. And I'm going to take 4 deep breaths. The purpose of this framework, and the reason why it's so incredibly useful, this has been validated with countless populations, is it links a specific set of actions or tools with a specific context. It makes emotion regulation automatic. So the moment you encounter that situation, you don't have to stop and think, what should I do? You know exactly what to do.
You have a plan.
You have a really good plan. Interestingly enough, this is precisely what Navy SEALs do before they have missions. They don't call it WHOOP, but they definitely don't call it WHOOP.
Maybe they should.
Maybe they should. it's uncanny. So I was interviewing a Navy SEAL for the book, and I was asking him, so how do you prepare for a mission? It's like, well, we sit around in a briefing room. First thing we do is we identify what's our objective, what's our goal, what do we hope happens, outcome. All right, what are the things that might make this mission go sideways? And they list them out. And then for every one of those potential obstacles that they list, they have 3 different plans for how to deal with it. And so they list that out, and then they go around the room, Socratic style, calling on each other to make sure that everyone knows what these plans are. This is one of the most successful organizations in the world in terms of what they do, right? They succeed time and again, and they are using a methodology that we all have access to and can apply to help deal with our own emotional missions, if you will.
Well, it sounds like it is coming up with a plan and then executing it with a number of different tools in your emotional toolkit that you have. How have you found folks that actually utilize the strategy, the WHOOP, if you will? What has their experience been like?
Well, you should all know, by the way, that like my core identity is a geeky scientist. So everything that I'm talking to you about, these are all science-based tools. This is true of WHOOP as well. The technical name for WHOOP is mental contrasting with implementation intentions. It's a bit of a mouthful. But there's been loads of research on it, and you find that this helps people achieve their health goals. It helps with problems of emotion dysregulation. It has been shown to help facilitate interpersonal conflict. There was even a very high-profile paper a couple of months ago, I believe, or last year, showing that you can teach first graders to use this framework, and it improves their ability to achieve in schools. So there's a wealth of data that supports this. If you're interested in using it, you can download a little worksheet that just WOOP, and it lists it out from the Character Lab, an organization founded by Angela Duckworth, a psychologist at Penn. And it takes 5 minutes. You'll be amazed at what taking 5 minutes to actually articulate your goals and come up with a plan can actually do for you. It really helps organize your trajectory. So I would say, give it a shot.
And it sounds like it can be used in a variety of different settings. It's amazing
Absolutely.
that even first graders have been found to
First
find
graders,
helpful.
PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, I think. Wild results.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. Well, Dr. Kross, this has just been so insightful. We really appreciate all of the tools that you've shared with us, and hopefully a lot of folks are going to be excited to pick up the book and learn some more. We, at this point, would like to open it up to the audience members. So for those of you that have any questions or thoughts, we have 2 microphones set up in the middle of the auditorium here. Please feel free to walk up and ask any questions that you might have of Dr. Kross.
So my name is Trish Meyer, formerly with the University of Michigan Depression Center. Now I work at the Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation. And you alluded earlier to sort of chaotic, turbulent times right now that kind of feel out of control. I guess what strategies do you have for kind of 2 parts of this, both regulating your emotions and reactions to events that you may not have control over, and also at the same time feeling like it's okay to still feel good sometimes, you know what I mean? Because with so much happening and people being impacted, sometimes it's like, am I still allowed to be happy? Do I have to compartmentalize that while I am still very concerned about other things? So I realize it's kind of a rambling question. But
it's a great set of questions. And so number one, yes, it's please be happy. We could all use some happiness, and emotions are contagious. That's another thing I talk about. And so your being happy and expressing happiness will likely have dividends for those around you. Shoulding in general is when it comes to emotions is tricky. I'm of the belief that all emotions, even the quote unquote bad ones, can serve a helpful function as long as they're experienced in the right proportions, and certainly true of happiness. What do we do about the current turbulence? My God, there's turbulence in the world right now. let me give you the caveat first. There's no magic pill. Different tools for different people. Some tools that really work for me, I practice strategic avoidance. So we often hear that avoidance is toxic. This is true of chronic avoidance, no question about it. But what we often fail to realize is that you don't have to actually choose between just approaching or avoiding. You can go back and forth. And so I dose my exposure to the news. Like, I love reading the newspapers. I have my whole life. But now I really limit my consumption, right? I read in the morning, and then in the afternoon I try not to read at night. So, you change the information that's coming in, that's going to have an implication for your emotional life. I also practice mental time travel. I think about how I'm going to feel sometime down the road when things may be less turbulent. I really broaden my perspective. I look at how, as a society, this is not the first time we've experienced turbulence, and it won't be the last. Like, this is what life looks like. That helps lower the volume on the chatter that can easily begin to percolate when I look at any one of the headlines in the New York Times. And so those are a couple of tools that work for me. Music too. Put on some feel-good music in the background. That's an immediate jolt.
Thank you. And I think coming together in gatherings like this certainly helps as well. So,
thank you for the question.
Do you have, a lot of these techniques seem to be really powerful sort of in the moment, and things that we can learn. Do you have any evidence sort of on long-term outcomes for people who've been able to sort of hardwire some of these skills into how they attack sort of emotionally charged situations?
Not nearly as much as you or I would like. So here's the current state of the literature when it comes to these tools. Scientists have done, I think, a pretty good job at identifying individual tools, carefully profiling how they work mechanistically, looking at their short-term effects, and also some long-term effects too. For example, one tool I haven't talked about is expressive writing. People here familiar with expressive writing? It's as close as you get to magic in the best possible usage of that term. When you're struggling with something really powerful, sit down and write about it for 15 to 20 minutes, 1 to 3 consecutive days. What that does is it gives a structure to your experience. It forces you to work through that experience, create a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Expressive writing has been shown to have effects that are beneficial and last over 6 or so months. So there are data of that sort, but what we don't have an archive on is the utilization of different combinations of tools. That's only something that people are studying right now. So, that's where the jury is out, and we're going to have to see what happens when we track people, which we're now doing. There is, of course, data on CBT and other kinds of clinical interventions that use combinations of tools with some overlap to what I've talked about, and that those do have more long-term effects. So there are models out there to suggest that the long-term benefits are feasible, but we need more data.
Thank you both for this great discussion. I have a question for both of you. It's kind of an open-ended one, but it relates to data and the theme of the conference. And I think one of the strengths we have in the mental health field is how diverse our field is, how many different disciplines and people want to help others. I also think it's a bit of an Achilles heel and a bit of a weakness when it comes to data collection because we don't all agree on the same terms. And I'm just wondering how, sort of in your own work, when you think about whatever the measure is, whether it's happiness, flourishing, mattering, thriving, how do you bring data-informed approaches to these concepts in your work in practical ways to help students in both of your settings?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Go ahead, Ethan.
Okay. Well, I think one place that we could do a whole lot better is being more integrative. I think it is a real tragedy at a place like this university, and there are many other examples like this. You've got world leaders at what they do that never talk to each other, even though they're doing stuff that is remarkably similar. Someone's calling it resilience and another person's calling it happiness. And I think there's just tremendous lost opportunity by not bringing those folks together and having a mind share designed to get us to the next level in this space. So just a statement that I agree with. Me personally, data is always involved in what I do. I always draw a sharp distinction between opinion versus data-driven research. I think data is not going to solve all of our problems, but it's going to give us the best chance of finding the optimal solution. So I think it's just really important for us to be clear that when we're talking about stuff that is based on empirical work and when we're not.
Yeah, and I would say, in the work that I do, it's usually direct work with students. And so data, as you mentioned, Ethan, can be collected broadly. It can also be data on yourself. And that's really the focus that we put on the individual work that we do with students, is looking at your own individual data. So as Ethan mentioned, nothing is quite linear, right? We don't know exactly, we don't grow in this sort of pathway. The dots are going to be all across the board, but we're trying to look at our data over time. And so encouraging students to think of their own data in that way rather than in the moment, in that one moment of despair when you have failed an exam, for example, or have broken up with your significant other, being able to step out of that one data point and look more broadly is one of the things that we encourage students to do. We also, as we look more broadly at the data across the students that we interface with, I work more specifically with engineering students, and what we find is that students that are engaged with someone, whether that is a counselor at CAPS or whether it's their faculty member in their course or whether it's another helper, if you will, because as you mentioned, there is plenty of helping fields out there, but being able to engage with someone that they feel is aligned with them. So this feeds back to what you were saying earlier, Ethan, where you feel motivated and believe in yourself. Having somebody else that also believes in you and your ability to grow really does lead to positive outcomes. We see this in positive outcomes with regards to their grades, with retention, etc.
All right, I think going once, twice. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Ethan. This has been so helpful. I hope that everyone here has taken away or added some tools in their toolbox, as Ethan has said, with regards to shifting the way that we react to events in our lives. Thank you so much, Ethan.